Welcome to episode 3 of Real Garage, where we're going to upgrade the stock suspension on this to a 4-link design, go on a real road trip, as well as do one of my real projects to help optimize your garage space. So I call this episode, What's Holding My Rear End? Well, I can tell you this, it is not going to be the stock leaf spring suspension that this thing left the factory with. It just can't handle the performance and applications that I want to put it through. And the more I get into this project, the more I want to implement some of the features of the multiple forms of motorsports that I get to work in. So primarily, it's going to be set up in a pro touring configuration for the street. But I'm going to do some road course track days, as well as some autocross events, maybe even some straight up grudge matches, and why not drift up a few parking lots or two, right? So the 4-link design is really going to handle what I want to do for this project. First, I need to install some mounts for the 4-link suspension. Okay, these are actually going to be for the upper links, and I need to cut out a pocket in the floorboard so that that upper link can attach to the mount. I'll be using my Spectrum plasma cutter to cut that pocket out, and then my air grinder to just fine-tune the cut area. Okay, these will get drilled all around this mount and plug welded. It'll also get welded around the whole outside edge as well as the underside of the pocket. So this will be securely mounted inside the vehicle. The lower links will get mounted to the original leaf spring location on the bottom side of the car. Okay, so this is going to be the primary fabrication for this part. Speaking of suspension, I really need to make a decision on what kind of rear end I want to use for this project. That's going to be critical when it comes time to locate the fuel cell and some of the fabrication that's going to happen in the trunk area. Not too long ago, I upgraded the rear end in my Chevelle to a 9-inch racing rear end from GearFX, which is owned by Kyle Tucker from Detroit Speed. I think it'd be fun to go over there and take a look at how they put those things together. So let's take my red-headed girlfriend out for a real road trip and see if Kyle can set us up a tour over at GearFX. Mr. Tucker.
Hey Andy.
Thanks for spending some time with me.
You bet. Good to see you as always.
Awesome. Hey, I finally got the brake-in oil out of that rear end I put in a couple weeks ago.
Good.
It's really hard to drive that thing 500 miles on the brake-in oil like a normal person.
Especially you. I know how you are.
Yeah. I was really wondering if I could actually get a tour over there at GearFX because I would like to see how these things are put together.
I would love you to see what we do over there, and let's get a hold of Fuzzy. Fuzzy runs the shop, and meet the guys over there and check it out.
Awesome.
We'll give him a call.
Thanks.
Andy, how you doing?
Fuzzy, how are you, sir?
Seeing you again.
You too.
Welcome to GearFX.
Thanks, man. Thanks for letting us come by.
We'll roll out the red carpet for you. Well, come on, I'll show you the shop.
Thanks.
We were fortunate that when we moved into this building, it was a clean slate, so we could lay everything out the way we wanted to. So if we come around this way, Johnny's working on one of our NASCAR gears. This is our NASCAR pinion yoke.
Okay.
And the guys, when they're building these, they'll keep turning it to match it to get the minimum amount of run out between the two mated parts.
Okay.
Right. So some aftermarket parts that we get, you might have 20th hour run out in them.
Sure.
Right. So we try to minimize that as much as possible.
And if that's the case, if you do have a piece that has that much run out, do you just take that piece out, scrap it, and then get a new one and just keep working that way?
Because you might get a pinion.
Yeah.
Right. That is all the way one way itself, so you can still match it up sometimes.
Sure.
A high-end part like this, obviously, there's going to be tighter tolerances than a mass-produced part. Let's go check out our dirty room where we clean all the parts.
Okay.
Everything that comes in the door that's used, it gets tore down. It gets cleaned in the parts washers here. And it moves over to our hot wash. Then we MagnaFlux crack check any of the gears, shafts, forks, shift rails, any of the steel components. One of the value-added things we have is that we can rim polish ring and pinions, gears, shafts. This is an aftermarket ring and pinion set straight out of the box that has its phosphate coating on it. This is a ring and pinion from the same manufacturer after we've done our rim polishing process. It's a 6-hour process.
Wow, okay.
Start to finish.
Yeah.
So
Well, I'm glad I went with that. Now that I actually see what it looks like. You know, before when you kind of going through the order sheet and what I want in it, I kind of just went crazy with it. But to actually see it really, really makes a difference.
Andy, these are some of our NASCAR transmissions in our lease fleet. We've got a couple different versions here. And then these are our NASCAR Ford 9-inch gears. We've got 200 of these in stock. We've got about 40 to 50 of our own transmissions. And then up here on the rack, we've got another 300 to 400 ring and pinions. We work with our teams a couple weeks ahead of an event. We'll show up on Tuesday with our delivery truck. We'll gather up all the gears and transmissions from that past weekend's race, and we're typically dropping off product for a couple of events ahead. Another one of the value-added things that we discussed earlier was our Ford 9-inch gear break-in dyno. So we've got an electric motor here that drives through a belt. It goes through a Rankine NASCAR transmission, a NASCAR 4-inch drive shaft into a Ford 9-inch gear. And we run the dyno for a set amount of time with no load against it. It's pulling against the weight of the armature in this motor right here. And then we'll apply a current to this and it drags down and applies even more load. We're building complete rear end housings, right? So we have all the fixtures and jigs and everything to do that with. This particular housing right here is an A-body housing like the one we built for you.
Yep.
It has 3-inch centerless ground tubing, a Ford 9-inch extreme duty center housing. It has the Gear FX top brackets and lower trailing arm mounts.
One of the things that absolutely sold me on the Gear FX rear end too was the fact that they're all TIG welded together. You know, they look beautiful, they flow, but the TIG welding for me ensured that these things are going to be perfectly straight. I've raced cars my whole life, I've built other street cars, and I've had new rear ends from other companies, and they're already out of square when they're brand new.
We don't have to put a lot of work into them with using the centerless ground tubing, taking that mill slag off the outside, TIG welding, and then using full circle brackets. Everything welds up really nice.
So we'll be able to see the welding part of it, right?
Yep. We'll
Awesome.
go visit Eric next.
Let's do that. Eric, tell me what you're working on.
Well, Andy, I'm working on a first-gen Camaro with Detroit Speed brackets on it. And this is still the extreme duty housing with centerless ground tubes that we use.
So I see you're using a Dynasty 350 on this project.
Correct.
Is there anything special you do with the settings, or do you just straight TIG weld?
I use a pulsar on this.
Okay.
Better penetration and better speed for me.
So you have the pulsar set kind of slower so that you're actually adding the filler metal as it's pulsing.
Correct.
Okay, gotcha.
Correct.
Which actually that also reduces the heat effect zone in the piece too, so that's got to reduce or eliminate that problem with warpage after you're welding.
It just concentrates the heat better, so you don't have to have such a large weld bead.
Oh yeah, no doubt.
And it looks better. It's better quality.
It is. It
And
is.
it's a stronger weld.
Fuzzy, thanks again
You're
for
welcome.
your time today. It was awesome seeing how you put these rear ends together, and I learned a lot. By the way, why do they call you Fuzzy?
I can't really tell you.
All right, well, I'm gonna get out of here.
All right. Be
Thanks,
careful.
buddy.
Be safe. Thank you.
Okay, I'm about ready to make these cuts. But remember, read and follow all labels and your owner's manual. I use the template to mark out the lines where I need to cut and punch this out to make room for the upper link mount. The links I'm going to be using are going to be the ones made by Detroit Speed. Normally I'd make my own and I'd use Heim joints or a monoball, but they loosen up over time and become a little chattery. So these have some high strength bushings in them, and they use this swivel link technology that still allows the rear end to articulate through full travel when it's going through its movement. So I think this is the way I'm going to go because it's going to give me that performance and that ride that I'm looking for out of this car. I'm going to be using the Spectrum 375 plasma cutter to make these cuts, but in the meantime, why don't you guys check out one of my real projects to help optimize your garage space. And when you come back, I'll have these things just about ready to weld in. I recently moved from a much larger building to this smaller shop, and I'm challenged on trying to find places to put everything. I know my own faults, and my faults are, if there's a flat surface, I'm gonna start piling stuff on it, which is the reason I hate shelves. So today, I'm gonna be working on a project to get all my cordless tools and chargers off of one of my welding benches and mount it on a wall so it's out of the way and easy to get to. So this is what I'm thinking for this project. Ultimately, I want to make a shelf, two shelves actually, one that holds the tools and one that holds the chargers. I want to make the shelf that holds the tools actually to have some slots in it so that I could actually take and easily remove the tools. So I'm going to take a piece for the bottom shelf and I'm going to cut however many slots in that bottom shelf. Then I'm probably going to do maybe 6 tools. I'm going to make my slots all the same distance so I don't have to keep the tools in whatever order and they'll still fit. And I'm going to make that measurement now. I'm going to overhang that a little bit, about 1 inch on each side of the tool. And so that gives me on mine about 23 inches. So I'm going to make that tool holder shelf 23 inches long, and then I'm going to lay out where I need to cut those slots. As I was thinking about this, I think what I'm going to do is make these a little bit longer. I'm actually going to make the sides on this piece and I'm just going to put it in my brake and I'm going to bend those up. And that's going to add a little bit more rigidity to this charger shelf, and it's going to give me a position to weld the second charger shelf up on top. I love using aluminum. You could use steel if you wanted to do this project out of steel. I'm going to use aluminum and I'm actually going to cut 3 pieces. I made the tool holder shelf longer, and then I'm going to bend the sides up on it, and then I'm going to make the other shelf exactly that 23 inches, and I'm going to weld that in the middle, and then I'm going to weld that to a back piece which is going to get mounted to the wall. So after I laid out the base of the tool holder, I'm going to determine how wide I'm going to put these tools apart, and that's going to determine the slots, the dimensions between the slots. So if I put my tools together and I'm going to run that probably, if I get enough space between that, about 2 inches in between the tools. So if I set all my tools up in a row, I'm going to have about 1 inch overhang on the end. I'm going to have a 1 3/4 inch slot for the tool. I'm going to have a 2-inch spacing between the slots, and that's going to continue all along that piece. So I measured that originally from 23 inches wide, and I added 10 inches on each side that's going to be bent up for the sides. My charger shelf is going to be a straight 9 inches wide by 23 inches long, but I'm going to bend a 1/2 inch lip on the end of that shelf, again, to hold the chargers in place. I'm also going to measure and lay out my back piece, which everything is going to get welded to. So I know that it's going to be 23 inches wide, and I made the sides to my shelf 10 inches. So I'm going to make my back piece 10 inches by 23 inches. Now I'm going to take this over to my stomp shear and I'm going to cut this, but you could use a Sawzall, you could use, if you've got really strong hands, you could use a pair of tin snips, or even a cutoff wheel to cut this stuff. So now that I got my 3 major pieces cut, I've got my tool holder shelf, my top charger shelf, and the back piece cut. I will be bending the sides on the tool holder shelf, and I'll be putting a 1/2 inch lip on the charger shelf. But before I do that, I'm going to punch my holes and cut my slots into the tool holder shelf. So I use my Rotex punch to punch the holes in here, and now I'm going to take it over to the bandsaw and actually cut these into slots. And those are going to be my slots that's going to hold my tools. Now I'm going to take this and the charger shelf over to the brake, and I'm going to bend the sides up on this, and I'm going to bend a 1/2 inch lip on the charger shelf. If you remember earlier on, I was talking about using 5052 aluminum for this project. I actually found a piece of 003 aluminum that I'm going to use for the top piece. 003 bends a lot easier than 5052, and I had a piece of this scrap laying around, so I thought I'd use it. One thing we're going to do before we take it over to the welder to TIG weld these together is we're going to remove that plastic film that's on these aluminum pieces. Even though this film is on there, there's still an oxide layer that's on the aluminum that has to be removed. And really the best practice for that is to take a stainless steel brush that's dedicated just to your aluminum and wire brush the sides or the areas which you're going to weld. That's going to help remove that oxide layer from the aluminum, and it's going to reduce some of the contamination you may see in the weld. Contamination will show up in the weld as little peppers or little specks inside the weld puddle. After I get done wire brushing my piece, I'll take some acetone and I'll wipe the piece off to remove any of that oxide dust that's still remaining on the piece where I brushed it. I use this little plunger can because then it puts just the right amount of acetone on my rag. And you'll be able to see easily how much it removes from the piece even though I wire brushed it. It's still pulling a good bit of that oxide dust off of the piece. For this project, I'm actually going to be utilizing a spool gun to tack these parts in place. I think a spool gun is kind of underused in the small frame Miller-Matic family and the Multimatics that have the ability to run spool guns. They're easy to hook up. The Miller-Matics and the Multimatics have an auto gun select, so as soon as you plug the spool gun into the machine, it selects spool gun from its microprocessor, and you're ready to use the spool gun. There's no switches to put in or change. All you have to do on the front of the machine then is put your parameters in for your aluminum, and you can go to welding. I'm going to use it on the Multimatic 220, and I'm going to be using it with QuickTech. The QuickTech in the Multimatic 220 allows me to use the spool gun and then immediately change over to the TIG torch flawlessly and seamlessly by just stepping on the pedal or pulling the trigger. Keep in mind, when you're going to use the spool gun, you got to change the gas on the MIG gas solenoid valve to 100% argon. Because I'm going to be using both the TIG and the MIG at the same time, I am going to use a dual regulator flow meter from Miller. I can hook up one argon tank to both solenoids. So now I can seamlessly change between the spool gun and the TIG without having to change bottles. The reason I'm tacking it with the spool gun is because the pieces are quite large and the material isn't that thick, so it's kind of cumbersome to try and hold the thing and try to TIG weld and tack it and make sure everything stays in place. If I MIG weld tack it, I can hold it and keep it in place much easier. So I've tacked with the spool gun and TIG welded the bottom tool holder shelf in place. It doesn't have to be TIG welded across the whole seam, but if you wanted to, you could. I just kind of stepped mine. And now I'm gonna tack weld the top shelf in. Just gonna set it on my marks. So now I finished welding my cordless tool holder together, and I need to decide where I'm going to put my power strips. What I'm going to do is mount it on the back on the base, therefore the plug's up and out of the way, and it shouldn't interfere with pulling my batteries out. All in all, I think it worked out great. And I got all my clutter off my weld bench. Welcome back. I pretty much have these things in position to where they need to be welded. Okay. Actually, I just had a thought. My wife says I'm a horrible multitasker. And while you guys were watching a real project, I was mounting these in the car. I'm gonna have to show this video to her. Anyway, now that I got these in position, it's critical to get these things mounted in the right position, first of all. I know that from the diagrams that I got from Detroit Speed that they have to be 29.5 inches center to center. And then what I like to do is center them in the car. I'll measure from the side panels to the mount, but I'll also measure from the underside, from the frame rail to the inside of each one of these pockets. And that'll pretty much make sure that I'm right on the money. You'll notice that this one is perfectly fit, whereas this one on the passenger side, it has a pretty good gap in between the mount and the floorboard area here. But the left side of this mount, it's perfectly tight, and that's the critical area. The critical area is where the frame rail is running underneath here and this back panel. And this back panel has 2 and sometimes 3 layers that are spot welded together, and the frame rail area and the pan, that's going to be 2 layers. Now the floor pan, that's just 1 layer of material, and it can be easily drawn up to the mount once you get your mount in the right position. This bolt is actually one of the bolts that hold your seat belt in place, and this bolt hole in this mount has a pretty good amount of play, so you can get this positioned where you want, and then just torque that bolt down to hold this mount in place. I like to put a couple of spot welds in too, just to keep it firm, and then I'll drill a hole in the area where the gaps are large, and I'll put a 1/4 inch nut and bolt on here with a big washer on the bottom, and I'll draw that bottom panel up to the mount, and then I can make my plug welds from there. You'll also notice that the curved area of this bend inside the floor pan area, it also doesn't fit quite well, and I've really never had any of those fit perfectly. You know, the floorboards, they're never the same, and so you're going to have those variances. But the critical part is this frame rail and this back piece. Those are usually pretty similar. So when you're making this curved area and trying to pull that up to the mount, you're actually going to make a relief cut in that and then put your bolt in there to try and draw it up. If you make that relief cut, it'll allow the metal to pull together, and it'll allow it to pull up tight to the mount so you can weld it. And I'll show you what that looks like from the bottom side. Okay, I'm going to be using the Multimatic 220 AC/DC. I'll be MIG welding these in. We'll be plug welding them obviously, but we're also going to weld all the way around the perimeter and on the bottom. I'm using 024 Hobart ER70S6 wire. I have my machine set for 16 gauge. And the reason I do that is because when I measured the material thickness of these, I thought it was 1/8 inch, but it's actually closer to 10 gauge. So I need enough power to properly fuse into these mounts, but yet still not burn through and punch holes in the floorboard areas. I'm not too concerned about the areas where I have double panels because it is going to be thicker there. And another thing to note too is when I'm drilling my holes on these mounts, a lot of these holes, they're not equally spaced, and that's because the spot welds that are in the car where these double panels are, they're not equally spaced either. So I don't think any spot welds from the factory are equally spaced. So what I did is I make my holes over the top of those existing spot welds, so when I do plug weld them, I'm making sure that I'm attaching this mount to all those layered materials, not just the top layer. So let's take a look at the bottom side and show you how these things actually fit in. All right, so here's the underside, what that looks like. You can see the 4-link mount is positioned tight up against the floor pan area. You can see a couple of those 1/4 inch bolts with the washers that I used to pull it up. And this is where that frame relief, that cut for that corner I made, once you make that cut, it allows this to be pulled in tight to that mount. Then I'll just come back when I'm welding all around the outside of this, I'll come back and put a bead on that relief cut, and that'll seal it all up. Let's get welding these things in. I'm not getting any younger. Alright, I got the driver's side mount installed, but I do want to backtrack on you for a minute though too. As I was welding that and I got about halfway around the plug welds, I did notice that my welds were still a little bit hot, and on that single panel area I did have a couple of burn throughs. So, which in itself isn't a problem, you can still fill those in, but I did go back and make another adjustment on my machine, and I turned it down to the 18 gauge setting. So I'm going to use that 18 gauge setting to weld this whole side pocket in. Okay, I got all the plug welds done, except for the two where I had those bolts. And I took those bolts out that were holding the floor pan that helped pull that floor pan up to that mount. Took those out, and now I'm just going to fill in those holes. Then I can go back and weld my perimeter all the way around this mount and also do the bottom. Okay, I'm finishing up some of the underside welds, and I've got my machine still set for that 18 gauge setting. This material right on this edge is pretty thin on some of those single panels. I might even try dropping down to 20 gauge if I still find that it's a little bit too hot there. But for now, it looks like the 18 gauge setting is working pretty good. These are going to be mostly just spot welded, not continuously seamed. And you know, I'm really not looking for deep penetration here. I'm just looking to kind of seal this edge off. You know, that way water and any type of debris won't get up in there and possibly start rusting. That's it for the welding for today. That 18 gauge setting worked good for all the welds around the perimeter. I did have to make one adjustment though. For that weld on that little relief cut, I did turn the machine down to the 20 gauge setting for that. But outside of that one weld, these all turned out pretty good, just spot welding that in. Join us again for the next episode of Real Garage. Episode 4 is going to be called Picking My Rear End, and we're going to have a lot of fun. You know what I mean. We need to pick the rear end that's going to go in the car. And that's going to really determine what kind of fabrication is needed for the fuel cell area. So we're going to do a couple of road trips, and you'll see a real gear segment.